Hey everyone, thank you for being here with me today. I never imagined I would share this chapter of my life so openly, but after everything that happened, I realized that the most painful betrayals often hide behind the people we think we know best. Sometimes blood ties mask the truth in ways that leave you questioning every memory you ever held dear. My name is Nicole Thompson. I am 29 years old. I live in a quiet luxury estate nestled among the red rocks of Sedona, Arizona, where the desert landscape stretches out like a canvas of quiet strength. For the longest time, I believed my marriage and my family were built on that same kind of steady foundation, but one heartbreaking demand changed everything in a single afternoon. It started on an ordinary Tuesday morning last spring. The sun was already warming the sandstone walls of my home office, casting long shadows across the wide glass windows that overlooked the canyon. I had spent weeks preparing for a major client presentation, a confidential meeting about restructuring a portfolio of high-end desert properties that my consulting firm managed. My advisor, Lena Reynolds, had flown in from Phoenix the night before to help me finalize the numbers. Lena had been my trusted sounding board for years, someone who understood the delicate balance of client trust and sharp financial strategy in this competitive luxury market. We were seated at the long oak table in the sunlit conference room off the main living area reviewing the confidential meeting notes from our last strategy session when the heavy wooden door swung open without a knock. My husband walked in, his face set in that familiar determined expression he wore whenever he wanted to steer a conversation. My younger sister followed close behind him, carrying 2 cups of coffee like she belonged in the middle of my professional space. I had introduced her to Lena only once before, and yet here she was, smiling warmly, as if this were a casual family brunch. I set my pen down slowly, keeping my posture relaxed, even as a quiet unease settled in my chest. My husband did not waste time with pleasantries. He placed his hands on the table, leaning forward, so that the confidential meeting notes were partially covered by his shadow. "Nicole, we need to talk about the future of your firm," he said, his voice low but firm, the kind of tone he used when he expected compliance without debate. "This deal you are closing could be our ticket to real security, but it is time you transferred a controlling interest to me and my younger sister. We are family. Blood ties should mean something, and right now your independence is putting all of us at risk." I felt the words land like a stone in still water, rippling outward through the calm I had cultivated for years. My younger sister nodded beside him, reaching out to touch my arm in what looked like sisterly support. "He is right, sis. You have been carrying everything alone for too long. Let us help shoulder the load. False loyalty has no place in a real family." Her voice was gentle, almost soothing, the same voice she had used our whole lives whenever she wanted me to see things her way. I had always believed her loyalty was genuine, the kind of bond that survived childhood arguments and adult distance. In that moment, though, something in her eyes did not match the warmth in her tone. Lena shifted in her chair, her expression carefully neutral, but I caught the subtle glance she sent my way. I kept my breathing even, my hands steady on the table. Grace under pressure had become my quiet superpower after years of navigating complex negotiations in the desert real estate world. I did not raise my voice or push back immediately. Instead, I asked simply and clearly what exactly they meant by controlling interest and why this demand had to happen right now in the middle of a client meeting. My husband explained that recent market shifts had left his own developments vulnerable and that my firm's steady income stream could stabilize everything if we pooled our resources the right way. My younger sister added that she had already spoken with our parents, John and Mary Thompson, and they agreed it was the responsible choice for the whole family. The conversation stretched on for nearly an hour. I listened more than I spoke, letting them lay out their case while I observed the way my younger sister finished my husband's sentences and the way he kept checking his phone as if waiting for confirmation from someone else. By the time they left, promising to return later with formal documents, the confidential meeting notes on the table felt heavier than before. Lena stayed behind after they departed. She waited until the sound of their car faded down the winding estate driveway before she spoke. Nicole, that did not feel like a spontaneous request, she said quietly, her voice carrying the same measured calm I tried to maintain. If you want, I can quietly review some of the partnership agreements we have on file. Something about the timing feels off. I thanked her grateful for her steady presence, and we wrapped up the client presentation as planned. The rest of the day passed in a blur of follow-up calls and property site visits under the bright Sedona sun. But that evening, alone on the wide terrace watching the red rocks turn gold in the sunset, I could not shake the sense that the demand was only the beginning. Later that night, after my husband had gone to bed claiming exhaustion from a long day, I sat in my office and opened my secure laptop. I pulled up the digital folder containing years of financial records, the ones I had meticulously organized as part of my work. Something my husband had said about pooling resources kept echoing in my mind. I began cross-referencing recent transactions, and that is when I noticed the first small discrepancy. A series of transfers from one of our joint accounts had been routed through a small consulting entity I did not recognize. The amounts were not enormous, but they were consistent, and each one coincided with dates when my younger sister had visited us from out of town. I closed the laptop for a moment and stared out at the dark canyon. Past and present felt like they were colliding in the quiet of my home. I remembered how my younger sister had always positioned herself as my biggest supporter, the one who cheered my career milestones even when our parents sometimes questioned why I poured so much into building something independent. Blood ties, she would say, should mean we lift each other up. Yet here I was staring at records that suggested a different story. I decided to sleep on it and revisit the numbers with fresh eyes in the morning. The next day brought a new layer of unease. My colleague Olivia Bennett called from the office downtown to let me know that a few sensitive financial summaries had been requested by an external party. She sounded concerned but professional, the way she always did when protecting client privacy. I assured her I would handle it and asked her to forward the request details. When the documents arrived, I saw that the inquiry had come through a channel linked to my husband's development company. It was not illegal on its own, but combined with the previous day's demand, it felt like pieces of a larger picture were shifting into place. That afternoon, Victor Parker stopped by the estate unannounced. Victor had been a close friend since college, someone who had watched my career grow alongside his own work in private investigations. He had heard through mutual contacts that there might be some unusual activity around my firm's records and wanted to check in as a friend rather than a professional. We sat on the shaded patio with glasses of iced tea, the red rock formations rising behind us like silent witnesses. I shared the outlines of my husband's demand and the small discrepancies I had found keeping my voice steady and reflective. Victor listened without interrupting his expression, thoughtful. "Sometimes the people closest to us use that closeness as cover," he said gently. "If you need help digging deeper without raising alarms, I am here." I thanked him sincerely, feeling a quiet gratitude for the support that felt genuine and uncomplicated. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the desert floor, I decided it was time to look more closely at the confidential meeting notes Lena and I had prepared. I opened the folder again and began reading through the archived versions from 6 months earlier. Tucked among the standard projections was a single scanned page that did not belong. It was a set of handwritten notes dated just 2 weeks before my husband's demand, outlining a plan to gradually shift decision-making authority away from me. The handwriting was unmistakably my younger sister's. My heart did not race. Instead, a calm clarity settled over me, the same steady focus I brought to every complex client audit. I read the notes twice, noting the language about family alignment and protecting shared interests. False loyalty had been at work longer than I realized. I saved everything to an encrypted drive and sat back in my chair, letting the desert breeze drift through the open window. The betrayal was shocking in its quiet calculation, but I refused to let it unravel the composure I had built over years of graceful navigation through challenging situations. Later that evening, my husband mentioned the demand again over dinner, framing it as a simple conversation we needed to finish. My younger sister texted me shortly after offering to come by the next day to talk things through as sisters should. I replied politely that I would let her know, keeping my responses measured. Inside, I was already thinking several steps ahead. Lena had promised to run a discreet review of the partnership documents first thing in the morning. Victor had offered to cross-check some public filings if needed. I knew the road ahead would test every boundary I had ever set, but in the calm of my desert home, I felt the first stirrings of resolve. The desert night outside my windows held a tension I could almost feel in the air as the following week unfolded with the kind of quiet routine that often precedes a storm. I moved through my days with the same measured grace I had cultivated over years of navigating high-stakes negotiations in the luxury real estate world. Mornings began with strong coffee on the terrace, watching the sunrise paint the canyon walls in soft pinks and golds, while I reviewed client updates and reflected on the demand my husband had made. I kept my responses to him and my younger sister polite and non-committal, buying myself time to think without letting emotion cloud my judgment. Blood ties had always felt like a quiet promise in our family, the kind that masked deeper truths until they could no longer be ignored, and I found myself turning that idea over in my mind during those still hours. It was early the next Thursday when the first sign of real trouble arrived. My colleague Olivia Bennett called from the downtown office, her voice steady but edged with concern as she explained that portions of our confidential meeting notes from the recent portfolio restructuring session had surfaced online. Someone had leaked them to a local business forum and a couple of industry news sites, framing the details in a way that questioned the transparency of my firm's dealings with several prominent desert estate clients. The leak was not catastrophic on its own, but in the tight-knit world of Sedona's luxury properties, even the hint of irregularity could ripple outward fast. I listened calmly, thanking Olivia for the heads up and assuring her I would address it directly. Inside, I felt the weight of it settle not as panic, but as a clear signal that the financial discrepancies I had noticed earlier were no longer private matters. I spent the rest of that morning in my office cross-referencing the leaked excerpts against my secure archives. The notes matched exactly with the folder Lena Reynolds and I had prepared, including sensitive projections that only a handful of people should have accessed. My husband had mentioned pooling resources the day of the demand, and my younger sister had echoed his words with that familiar warmth that always made her suggestions feel like acts of love. False loyalty control, I realized, had been woven into our interactions for longer than I wanted to admit. Past decisions like sharing limited access to certain accounts during family visits collided with the present in ways that left a quiet ache in my chest. I did not rush to confront anyone. Instead, I reached out to Lena, who was back in Phoenix but available on video call within minutes. She reviewed the situation with her usual precision and suggested we bring in additional support before the leak gained more traction. Victor Parker stopped by again that afternoon, this time with a folder of public records he had pulled as a precaution. We sat on the shaded patio once more, the desert breeze carrying the faint scent of juniper as he laid out what he had found. The leak appeared to originate from an IP address tied to a temporary consulting entity, the same one linked to those small transfers I had spotted earlier. Victor's presence grounded me, a reminder that not every connection in my life was built on hidden motives. I thanked him sincerely, my voice, even as I processed the implications. Grace under pressure meant choosing clarity over reaction, and in that moment I focused on gathering facts rather than letting the betrayal pull me under. My husband arrived home later that evening, his demeanor carrying the same determined edge from the office meeting. He brought up the demand again over a simple dinner, suggesting the leak proved how vulnerable my independent operation had become without family oversight. My younger sister texted shortly after, offering to drive up from her place in Flagstaff to help sort through the mess as sisters should. The pressure built steadily over the next couple of days, small but persistent. Clients began asking cautious questions, and a couple of smaller accounts requested clarification meetings. I handled each one with the same straightforward professionalism I had always brought to my work, reassuring them that the matter was being addressed internally while I quietly strengthened internal safeguards. Lena flew back to Sedona on short notice, and we spent a full afternoon in the conference room reviewing every layer of the partnership agreements. That is when we decided to loop in Rebecca Hayes, a sharp corporate attorney I had worked with on previous high-value transactions. Rebecca arrived at the estate the following morning, her briefcase in hand, and her questions direct yet respectful. She listened as I outlined the demand, the discrepancies, and the leak, then examined the confidential meeting notes I had flagged. Her assessment was calm and thorough. Nothing immediately actionable in a legal sense, but enough red flags to warrant deeper protection of my firm's structure. Evenings brought longer reflections. I would sit on the terrace after everyone had left, the vast desert sky stretching above me, thinking about how blood ties had masked the truth for so long. My younger sister had always presented herself as my closest ally, the one who celebrated my successes and offered gentle advice when challenges arose. My husband had built our life together on shared ambitions, or so I believed. Yet the evidence accumulating on my desk painted a different picture, one of coordinated steps to shift control under the guise of family support. I did not dwell in anger. Instead, I let the calm clarity guide me, documenting everything methodically while maintaining the routines that kept me centered. Victor checked in daily with updates on the leak's spread, and Rebecca began drafting preliminary protective measures for my business interests. The crisis deepened on a quiet Friday evening when a major client pulled back from finalizing a large estate acquisition, citing concerns over the circulating records. The news came via email just as I was preparing a light supper, and for the first time the weight of it pressed a little heavier against my composure. I set the phone down and took a slow breath, watching the sunset turn the canyon walls to deep crimson. That was the moment the phone rang again, this time with my younger sister's name on the screen. It was late past the hour when casual calls usually came, and something in the timing felt urgent. I answered calmly, keeping my tone even as I greeted her. The conversation started with her usual warmth, expressing worry about the leak and the stress it must be causing me. But as we spoke, her voice shifted, the words tumbling out faster under what sounded like her own mounting pressure. She mentioned how my husband had been working so hard on his developments and how family alignment could fix everything quickly. Then, in a slip, born of the crisis perhaps, or maybe the late hour loosening her guard, she confessed more than she intended. She admitted they had reviewed some of my files together during her last visit, framing it as concern for my well-being, but the details she let slip aligned too perfectly with the leaked notes and the unauthorized transfers. Blood ties, she said softly, should mean we protect each other from mistakes, even if that meant stepping in to guide decisions. The call lasted only a few minutes, but it left the air in the room heavier, the truth of their coordinated false loyalty now impossible to unsee. Past promises of support collided with the present reality in a way that felt both shocking and profoundly clarifying. I ended the call without accusation, thanking her for reaching out and saying I would think about everything. Alone again in the quiet of the estate, I replayed her words in my mind, the calm reflection allowing me to see the full shape of what had been hidden. The public leak had forced the moment, turning private manipulation into something that could no longer stay concealed. I sat with the encrypted drive open on my laptop, adding the new details from the conversation, while the desert wind whispered through the open windows. Rebecca would need to see this in the morning, and Lena and Victor would help map the next careful steps. My husband had already texted about meeting the following day to discuss next steps for the family, unaware of how much had shifted in that single call. The pieces were aligning faster now, the secondary conflict of the leaked records amplifying every pressure point and exposing the careful construction of false loyalty that my husband and my younger sister had built together. I felt no dramatic rush of emotion, only the steady resolve that had carried me through every professional challenge before. Yet beneath the composure, the irreversible loss of trust lingered like the cooling night air, a reminder that some boundaries once crossed changed the landscape forever. As I prepared for bed that night, The red rocks outside stood silent and unchanging, but inside my home the tension had reached a new threshold. The confession had opened a door I could not close, and the confrontation I had been preparing for felt closer than ever, its outcome still uncertain in the quiet hours ahead. The confession call from my younger sister had left the air in the room heavier than the desert night itself, a quiet weight that settled into the corners of my home office and refused to lift even as the first light of morning touched the red rock canyon outside. I slept little, but the hours of reflection only sharpened the calm clarity that had carried me through every challenge before. By the time the sun rose fully over the estate, I had already spoken with my advisor Lena Reynolds and my attorney Rebecca Hayes, both of whom arrived early with fresh perspectives and the kind of steady support that felt earned rather than assumed. Victor Parker joined us via video from his office in town, his presence a quiet anchor as we reviewed the confidential meeting notes once more, cross-referencing them against the leaked records and the details my younger sister had let slip in that late-night conversation. The evidence formed a clear pattern of false loyalty control, where blood ties had been used as a shield for coordinated steps to shift authority away from me under the guise of family protection. We sat together in the sunlit conference room, the wide glass windows framing the vast desert landscape like a living reminder of resilience, and I listened as Rebecca outlined the protective steps she had prepared overnight. Lena added practical insights from the financial side, emphasizing how the public leak of our records had already begun affecting client confidence in ways that could be contained if we acted swiftly. Victor confirmed that the IP trail pointed back to connections tied to my husband's development projects, and he had discreetly gathered additional documentation without crossing any lines. Their collaboration felt like a genuine network of trust, the kind built on mutual respect rather than hidden agendas, and it reinforced my decision to move forward with grace rather than haste. I thanked each of them sincerely, my voice steady, as I outlined the plan for the day. My husband had texted again that morning insisting we finish the conversation about the demand, and my younger sister had echoed the message suggesting they both come by the estate that afternoon to talk things through as family. I agreed calmly, setting the time for 3 o'clock, knowing the meeting would mark a turning point rather than a surrender. The hours leading up to their arrival passed in quiet preparation. I reviewed the encrypted drive one final time, ensuring every detail from the confidential meeting notes, the unauthorized transfers, and the confession call was organized and ready. Past promises of sisterly support collided with the present reality in my mind, but I did not linger in regret. Instead, I focused on the boundaries I was ready to set, the same way I had built my firm through years of careful decisions in the competitive luxury real estate market here in Sedona. When my husband and my younger sister pulled up the winding driveway shortly after 3, I met them on the shaded patio, the warm desert breeze carrying the faint scent of juniper as we settled into the outdoor seating area. My husband looked determined as always, his expression carrying that familiar mix of ambition and expectation. My younger sister smiled warmly at first, the same smile she had used our whole lives to soften difficult conversations, but I noticed the slight tension in her posture as she glanced toward the house. We began the discussion with measured words, my husband reiterating the need for family alignment and how the recent leak proved the risks of my independent operation. My younger sister nodded along her voice, gentle as she spoke of blood ties masking the truth, only when we refused to share the load. I listened without interruption at first, letting their words unfold while maintaining the graceful composure that had become my quiet strength. Then, when the moment felt right, I reached for the folder I had prepared and placed it on the low table between us. "I have been reflecting on everything you both shared," I said evenly, my tone straightforward and clear. "And I believe it is important we look at the full picture before moving forward." I opened the folder to the confidential meeting notes, pointing out the handwritten additions in my younger sister's distinctive script, the dates that aligned with her visits, and the pattern of small transfers that matched the leaked records now circulating publicly. The atmosphere shifted noticeably. My husband's expression tightened, and he leaned forward to dismiss the evidence as a misunderstanding born of stress, framing it once more as concern for our shared future. My younger sister reached out as if to touch my arm in that familiar sisterly way, insisting that false loyalty had no place in family and that they had only wanted to protect me from carrying everything alone. I remained calm, sharing the details from her confession call the night before without accusation, simply stating the words she had used about guiding decisions for the family's sake. The public leak had escalated things further, I noted, with several clients now questioning the stability of my firm because of how the records had been presented online. Their responses grew more insistent, the false loyalty control they had relied on beginning to crack under the weight of undeniable facts. I did not raise my voice or match their intensity. Grace under pressure meant holding space for the truth to stand on its own. That was when the ending twist unfolded in a way none of us could have scripted. Victor Parker had been monitoring the situation discreetly from his end, and as the conversation reached its most tense point, my phone buzzed with a secure message from him. He had obtained legal permission to share a final piece of evidence he had uncovered earlier that morning through public channels tied to the leak investigation. It was a recording of a secret call between my husband and my younger sister from 2 weeks prior, captured inadvertently on a shared business line during one of their planning discussions. Victor forwarded the audio clip to me right then, and with their permission, I played the brief excerpt through the speaker on my phone. Their voices were unmistakable, discussing the timing of the demand, the transfer of control through the confidential meeting notes, and how the public leak could be used to pressure me into compliance, all while framing it as loving family intervention. The recording ended abruptly, but the damage was complete. My husband and my younger sister froze, the colour draining from their faces as the truth of their coordinated betrayal hung in the warm desert air. Blood ties had masked the truth for years, but this last secret call surfaced at precisely the moment it could no longer be denied. My younger sister tried to explain it away as a private conversation taken out of context, her voice cracking for the first time. My husband shifted to threats of legal action against my firm, but Rebecca's earlier preparations had already secured my assets and business structure against such moves. The confrontation did not descend into chaos. I simply thanked them for coming and stated clearly that I would be protecting my firm and my independence moving forward, with no further discussion of transferring control. They left shortly after, the unresolved tension between us lingering like the heat haze over the canyon as their car disappeared down the driveway. In the days that followed, the consequences rippled outward in ways that felt both inevitable and bittersweet. The public leak had damaged my husband's latest development projects enough that several investors pulled back, forcing him to face the financial vulnerabilities he had tried to shift onto me. My younger sister distanced herself quickly, her messages growing sparse and eventually silent. When my parents, John and Mary Thompson, learned of the full scope through a family call the following weekend, they expressed disappointment in the situation, but ultimately withdrew their support from any further pressure on my end, choosing instead to focus on their own lives in the quieter corners of Arizona. Family support withdrawn left an emotional safety net, gone an irreversible loss that settled into my days with a quiet ache rather than dramatic rupture. I filed for separation the next week, not out of anger, but from a place of calm necessity, and the process unfolded without the prolonged battles some endure. My firm remained intact, the clients reassured through transparent follow-ups, and the estate in Sedona continued to be my steady sanctuary. Yet, the partial victory carried the weight of what had been lost. I achieved the protection of my professional world and my personal boundaries, but the emotional ties that once felt like home were severed in ways that left unresolved tension in the quiet moments. Blood ties had masked the truth, and once revealed they could not simply be restored. I found myself reflecting often on the terrace at dusk, the red rocks glowing softly as the sun set, feeling a profound, empowered peace in the knowledge that I had chosen myself with grace rather than vengeance. Trust must be earned, not assumed through shared history or familiar smiles and boundaries. heal wounds by creating space for genuine connections to grow. The desert taught me that resilience comes from within even when the landscape around you shifts unexpectedly. I continued my work with the same straightforward focus, strengthened by the support of Lena Reynolds, Rebecca Hayes, Victor Parker, and Olivia Bennett relationships built on mutual respect rather than obligation. My son from an earlier chapter of life who visited often brought laughter to the estate, reminding me that new beginnings could emerge from the quiet aftermath. The past collided with the present, one final time in a brief civil exchange with my husband, months later, where we acknowledged the end without reopening old wounds. My younger sister and I exchanged no further words, the silence a boundary that felt both necessary and final. There were no dramatic declarations of victory, only the steady rhythm of days filled with purpose and the subtle freedom that comes from no longer carrying the weight of false loyalty. Looking back now, I sit here in the warm afternoon light of my desert home, the canyons stretching endlessly before me, and I feel peaceful with no regrets. The shocking betrayal reshaped everything, but it also revealed my own strength in ways I had not fully recognized before. If you are facing a similar moment where trust feels tested by those closest to you, remember that boundaries heal wounds and that choosing yourself is never a loss, even when it comes at a cost. Thank you for listening to my story. Would you drop a yes in the comments if you believe trust must be earned, or a no if you have a different perspective on family loyalty?